Comic-Con was in full swing. The air buzzed with excitement as thousands of fans packed the hall, eager to catch a glimpse of their favorite stars. The convention floor was a kaleidoscope of costumes, banners, and flashing cameras, but the real magic was happening in the auditorium. Today, Robert Downey Jr. would be taking the stage for a Q&A. The crowd waited with bated breath, the tension palpable. A hush fell over the room as the event began. Fans held their breath, waiting for Robert to appear. But then, something unexpected happened. A sudden ripple spread across the audience as everyone turned toward the back of the room. A young boy, no older than 12, sat in a wheelchair, his eyes wide with anticipation. His presence was almost magnetic. As the crowd's gaze shifted toward him, the boy became the focal point, and for a moment, the noise of the event died down. Whispers filled the room, and the tension thickened. It felt like the calm before a storm that would be something extraordinary. Robert, standing on stage, scanned the crowd for the familiar faces of his fans. But as his eyes swept over the sea of eager faces, they locked onto something different. The boy in the wheelchair. There was no script in Robert's mind. Something deep inside him stirred, and in that moment, he made an unspoken decision. Without a word, he stepped away from the microphone and began walking toward the crowd. The audience fell into a stunned silence as Robert moved through the aisles, a bold choice that shattered the scripted expectations of the panel. He didn't acknowledge the stage or the Q&A. His only focus was the boy in the wheelchair. His steps were deliberate, each one echoing with the weight of the moment. The crowd parted, unsure of what was happening, but watching in anticipation. Robert reached the boy and stopped. Without a word, he knelt down in front of him, his expression focused and intense. The boy, startled, shifted slightly in his wheelchair, unsure of what to make of the sudden attention. For a moment, there was only the two of them, an electric silence between them. The audience held their breath. Was this part of the show, or was it something more? Robert's gaze never left the boys, and after what felt like an eternity, he leaned in, breaking the tension with a quiet whisper in the boy's ear. The words were too soft to hear, but the shift in the boy's expression said everything. The boy's lips parted, a smile slowly breaking through his nervousness, and his eyes welled with tears. The crowd was still, caught in the rawness of the moment, as the air seemed to change. Then, Robert did something even more unexpected. He reached into his pocket, pulling out something small and shiny, a figure. The crowd, still in suspense, watched as Robert held out a small, polished Iron Man figurine to the boy. The boy's hand trembled as he took it, disbelief etched across his face. It wasn't just a toy. It was something far deeper, something that spoke of strength, courage, and a shared connection beyond the surface of celebrity and fandom. The boy's voice barely broke the silence as he whispered, "Thank you." And in that moment, the entire hall seemed to freeze, suspended in the enormity of the gesture. The crowd, who had been anticipating another typical celebrity moment, was now witnessing something profoundly human, a raw connection that transcended any performance or script. The boy gripped the figurine tightly, his fingers curling around it as if it were a lifeline. For a fleeting second, it felt like the world outside the convention didn't exist. There was only the boy, Robert, and the figurine that represented something more than just a hero on a screen. A few beats passed. The crowd, still silent, seemed to understand that this moment wasn't meant for applause. It was meant for something deeper. The room was still, as if everyone was waiting for a signal to breathe again. The comic book convention, normally a whirlwind of noise and excitement, had now become a backdrop to something intimate, something far beyond the spectacle. Robert remained kneeling in front of the boy, his face inches away from his. There was no flash of cameras, no booming microphone, no need for applause. It was as though the entire universe had paused for this singular moment. The boy, still clutching the Iron Man figurine, was overwhelmed. His breath came in shallow bursts, and his eyes flicked nervously between Robert and the figurine in his hands. He didn't know what to say or how to react. Robert stayed still, his gaze unwavering, watching the boy's every movement. He hadn't spoken, not yet. It was as if he was waiting for the boy to make the first move, but nothing came. The boy shifted slightly in his wheelchair, his hands trembling, unsure whether to smile, cry, or run away from the attention. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The weight of the moment seemed too much, too overwhelming for him to process all at once. Then, after a long pause, Robert leaned in just a little closer. His voice was soft, almost a whisper, yet it seemed to carry over the entire hall. "You know," Robert said, his voice calm and sincere, "being a hero doesn't mean you have to wear a suit. It doesn't mean you have to be someone big. It's the small moments like this that count, the quiet acts of courage that no one sees." The boy's eyes flickered with emotion, and the crowd, sensing the shift, fell into a deeper silence. Robert's words were not scripted, not part of the panel's plan. It was a raw, human moment, an unexpected pivot from the usual celebrity performance. Robert wasn't just being Tony Stark. He was being something far more genuine. The boy's eyes filled with tears, and a small, tentative smile began to creep across his face. It wasn't the broad, confident smile of someone who had met their idol. It was the smile of someone who had just been told something they needed to hear, something that made them feel seen, understood. The crowd, caught in the emotional pull of the moment, held its breath. For the first time, the convention felt smaller, more intimate. It was no longer about the spectacle. It was about the connection between two people in front of thousands of onlookers. The boy, now overcome with emotion, nodded slowly, his hand still gripping the figurine like it was a treasure. He didn't know what to say, but his heart spoke for him. The silence in the room stretched long, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was an unspoken understanding that something incredibly special was happening. Robert Downey Jr. wasn't just meeting a fan. He wasn't just playing a role on a stage. He was showing up in a way that only a few could, without pretense, without performance. The boy's lips parted slightly, and his voice, though quiet, carried enough for Robert to hear. "Thank you," the boy whispered again, his voice wavering. Robert smiled gently, his own eyes softening with a mixture of pride and empathy. He took a deep breath, as if preparing for something else to come, and then, with a slow but purposeful movement, he reached into his other pocket. The audience, still in a hushed reverence, leaned in. What was happening next? Was Robert going to leave the boy with just a figurine? Would he offer a few final words and end this unexpected connection? No. The next moment would take everyone by surprise. Robert pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. The crowd's anticipation grew. What could it be? A note? A personal message? The piece of paper looked ordinary, but in that instant it felt significant. Robert carefully unfolded the paper, his eyes glancing at the boy one last time before holding it up for everyone to see. The words were written in a neat, yet hurried hand. Heroes are not made in suits. They're made in moments like this. The crowd took in the words, and the effect was instant. There was no applause, no cheering, just a deep, shared sense of realization. This wasn't a staged event. This was a lesson, a reminder of what it meant to truly be a hero. Robert handed the note to the boy, his hands gentle, as if entrusting him with something sacred. The boy took it carefully, his eyes welling with tears once again. For a moment, there was no sound, only the weight of the note and the powerful words that echoed in the minds of everyone in the room. Heroes weren't defined by their costumes or their powers. They were defined by their ability to show up, to be vulnerable, to connect. As the boy clutched the note, the crowd was overcome by the gravity of the moment. They weren't witnessing a celebrity moment. They were witnessing the kind of courage that could change lives. The boy, shaking, mouthed a silent thank you to Robert. It was enough. And then, without another word, Robert stood up, his eyes still locked on the boy. He reached out a hand, and the boy, still holding the figurine and the note, took it. Their handshake, simple but firm, marked the end of an unexpected, transformative interaction. But in the hearts of everyone in the room, it marked the beginning of something much bigger. The crowd, still silent, held its collective breath as Robert took a slow step back from the boy. For a moment, the atmosphere seemed to hang suspended in time. Robert's gaze softened as he observed the boy clutching the Iron Man figurine tightly, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. But Robert wasn't done. He reached into his jacket pocket once again, this time pulling out something more, something that seemed far more personal. A small object, roughly the size of a fist, was cradled in his palm. The audience leaned forward in unison, curiosity mounting, as Robert slowly extended his hand towards the boy. The figurine that had been given earlier was one thing, but this was different. The boy blinked, confused at first, unsure what to make of this new, unspoken offering. His fingers were still tightly curled around the original figurine, but as he looked into Robert's eyes, something shifted. Robert's expression was unwavering, his intent clear. With a deep breath, Robert placed the new item into the boy's trembling hands. This was no ordinary giveaway, no Comic-Con trinket. It was another Iron Man figurine, but this one was different. It had been polished to a mirror shine, every detail perfectly crafted. And it was more than just a toy. It was an artifact of strength, courage, and resilience. Something that symbolized what Robert had just shared with him. The boy's eyes widened as he held it up, looking at it in disbelief. His fingers traced the contours of the figurine, his breath catching in his throat. "This one," Robert said softly, "this one's for you. It's more than just a symbol of Tony Stark. It's a symbol of you, of your strength, your bravery. You're a hero, too." The boy looked up, his eyes filled with tears that had been held back for too long. He was overcome, speechless, as the weight of Robert's words sank in. The entire auditorium was completely still. No one moved. No one even dared to breathe. The crowd was caught in the enormity of what was happening. And then in the quiet that followed, the boy whispered, "Thank you," his voice barely audible through his emotion. He didn't know how to express what he felt, but somehow that one word was enough. The entire room seemed to feel it too. This was no longer just a celebrity interaction. It had transcended beyond fandom. It was a profound human connection, one that spoke directly to the heart. And as the boy clutched the figurine in his hands, it wasn't just a gift. It was a lifeline, a reminder that he, too, was a hero. Just as the weight of the moment seemed to settle over the crowd, Robert stood tall, but there was something else he had yet to share. Something unexpected. His fingers brushed against the side of his jacket, and once more, he reached into his pocket. The crowd, still on the edge of their seats, had no idea what to expect now. Was there more to come? What could possibly top this deeply emotional exchange? When Robert pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper, the crowd collectively leaned in. It wasn't a figurine this time. It wasn't another piece of memorabilia. It was a simple note, small, folded, and unassuming. He carefully unfolded it, reading the words aloud in a voice that resonated with an almost prophetic calmness. Heroes are not made in suits. They're made in moments like this. The words hung in the air, and the entire audience seemed to freeze, processing what they had just heard. The truth of it was undeniable. Robert wasn't just giving the boy a figurine. He was offering something far deeper, a lesson on what true heroism really meant. The boy, still trembling, glanced up at Robert, his eyes full of wonder and gratitude. And Robert, without hesitation, handed the note directly to the boy. "Take this," he said. "It's for you. It's for everyone who needs to hear it." The boy accepted the note, his hands shaking as he unfolded it once more. For a moment, his gaze drifted to the note, then back to Robert. The room remained silent. No applause, no shouts, just the weight of the message, sinking in. This was not just a feel-good gesture. This was something real, something that would stay with them all forever. And as the boy slowly held up the note, clutching it against his chest, Robert's eyes softened even more. The moment had shifted again, from an act of kindness to a declaration of something far more profound. The silence in the room deepened, carrying the emotional weight of Robert's words, his actions, and the connection they shared. As the boy stood up from his wheelchair to leave the stage, Robert gestured for him to stay. Everyone held their breath once again, wondering what would come next. This wasn't just a moment in a convention hall anymore. It was the beginning of something that would ripple far beyond the walls of Comic-Con. The boy stood still, clutching the figurine and the note close to his chest, his eyes still wide with disbelief. The weight of the moment had yet to settle fully. But before he could step away, Robert gestured for him to remain. There was something more that needed to be said. The audience, still caught in the quiet, wondered what would happen next. Robert, usually the charismatic actor full of quips and bravado, now stood vulnerable before them. The mask of celebrity was gone. He stepped forward, his voice a little softer, and his presence more grounded. "Wait," Robert said, his hand gently resting on the boy's shoulder. "Before you go, there's something I need to share." The room fell into an even deeper silence, as if everyone knew that this moment wasn't scripted, wasn't planned. It was real. Robert paused for a moment, looking out over the sea of faces, before returning his attention to the boy in front of him. "You know," Robert began, his voice quieter than before, but with a weight that everyone could feel, "when I was a kid, I didn't always know I had what it took. I didn't always feel like I had the strength to get through the tough times. But I had people who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. It wasn't about wearing a mask or pretending to be strong. It was about showing up, being vulnerable, and fighting through the dark moments." He took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the room, as if searching for the words to make this moment count. "I remember times when I didn't feel like I was enough, but it was those quiet, unexpected moments, the ones where people just saw me and understood. Those were the times that made me who I am today." The boy, still clutching the note, looked up at Robert, his expression softening. He wasn't sure he could understand all the words yet, but he felt them. He nodded slowly, his chest rising and falling with each shaky breath. Robert smiled at him, a genuine, understanding smile that cut through the usual public persona. He wasn't Iron Man here. He was just Robert, someone who had lived a life of ups and downs, someone who understood the importance of being seen. "Don't let anyone tell you that you're not strong enough. You already have what it takes," Robert said, his voice a little thicker now. "You're a hero, too." The boy smiled back, his face brightening as he held onto Robert's words. The crowd could feel the rawness of Robert's vulnerability. It was a side of him no one had expected to see at Comic-Con, but in that moment, it felt like the truest thing of all. The days following the event, the story of Robert Downey Jr.'s unexpected moment with the boy in the wheelchair spread like wildfire across social media. Clips of the interaction flooded Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, with fans and media outlets praising Robert for his sincerity and marveling at how an unexpected act of kindness could transform a moment of fandom into something so deeply emotional. The boy, whose name was Ethan, and his family were soon interviewed by reporters. The boy sat in front of the cameras, still clutching the figurine and the note with a mixture of awe and joy. "I never thought something like this would happen to me," Ethan said, his voice trembling with emotion. "When Robert knelt down and talked to me, I don't even know how to explain it. He made me feel like I mattered, like I was important." His mother, sitting beside him, wiped her eyes, clearly moved by her son's words. "This is a moment we will never forget." What Robert did, it gave Ethan so much strength. It showed him that he's capable of anything. Ethan nodded. "He made me feel like a hero." As the story spread, it became more than just a touching celebrity moment. It sparked deep conversations about what it truly means to be a hero. The moment wasn't about Iron Man or any of the larger-than-life characters people expected. It was about human connection. It was about seeing someone, truly seeing them, and lifting them up when they needed it most. Fans began to share their own stories of feeling invisible, of struggling to see their worth. They spoke about the courage it took to face their own battles, and how Robert's actions had made them reconsider what heroism meant in their own lives. Hashtag Heroes Like Thin trended for days, with people sharing photos of themselves holding up their own figurines, symbolic of the quiet strength they were now embracing. Even outside the world of social media, the story gained traction. News outlets picked it up, and people across the globe were moved by the gesture. What began as a moment of kindness at Comic-Con became a global message about compassion and vulnerability. Weeks later, images of Ethan holding his Iron Man figurine continued to circulate online. The photo, Ethan's smile wide, holding the figurine close to his chest with a handwritten note clutched in his other hand, became an iconic symbol of strength and hope. For Robert, the impact of that moment was felt far beyond the stage. He received countless messages from fans, some telling him how the interaction had helped them through their own struggles, others sharing how they had reevaluated their perceptions of what it meant to be a hero. It was clear that this wasn't just about a movie star or a comic convention anymore. This was about something universal. The understanding that heroism wasn't defined by a costume or the media's portrayal of a larger-than-life character. Heroism was defined by vulnerability, by empathy, and by the willingness to show up for someone in their most fragile moments. In the weeks that followed, Robert made a quiet promise to himself. He would never forget Ethan's face, the raw emotion he felt in that moment. And he would continue to show up, not just as a character on screen, but as someone who could make a difference in the world, one person at a time. For Ethan, the moment had transformed his life. He kept the figurine on his desk, a constant reminder that he, too, was strong, that he was brave, and that he was seen. Every time he looked at it, he remembered that day at Comic-Con, the day that started a ripple effect of change. And as the weeks passed, the message lived on in hearts across the world. Heroes are not made in suits. They're made in moments like this.